Good evening. I'm Christie Max Williams, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this November edition of the 21st year of the Arts Café Mystic. You may have noted that there was an election this week. How many of you actually voted? Isn't it fun? Don't you love the ritual? I vote at the firehouse on the other side of the river. For 20-something years I've been going there, and the nice polling place volunteers always welcome me and look at me after I announce who I am. You should try being Christie for a day or two. But don't you love depositing your ballot and the red, white, and blue sticker they give you that says, I voted? It's like being a child in grade school again and getting that gold star, isn't it? Come to think of it, that may be the point. This month marks the centennial of the birth of the great Welsh poet, Ellen Thompson. And since there's no better way to memorialize a poet than to invoke his poems, we thought we'd share one with you tonight. Here's a poem that tells of the poet's childhood summers on his aunt's farm. The farm and the poem are called Fern Hill. Now, as I was young and easy, under the apple boughs about the lilting house, and happy as the grass was green, the night above the dingle starry, time let me hail and climb golden in the heydays of his eyes, and honored among wagons. I was prince of the apple towns, and once below a time, I lordly had the trees and leaves trail with daisies and barley down the rivers of the windfall light. And as I was green and carefree, famous among the barns about the happy yard, and singing as the farm was home in the sun that is young once only, time let me play and be golden in the mercy of his means. And green and golden, I was huntsman and herdsman. The calves sang to my horn. The foxes on the hills barked clear and cold. And the Sabbath rang slowly in the pebbles of the holy stream. Oh, the sun long. It was running. It was lovely. The hay fields high as the house, the tunes from the chimney, it was all air and playing lovely and watery, and fire green as grass. And nightly, under the simple stars as I rode to sleep, the owls were bearing the farm away. All the moon long I heard, blessed among stables, the night jars flying in the ricks, and the horses flashing in the dark. And then to awake, and the farm, like a wanderer white with the dew, come back, the cock on his shoulder. It was all shining. It was Adam and maiden. The sky gathered again, and the sun grew round that very day. So it must have been at the birth of the simple light in the first spinning place. The spellbound horses walking warm out of the whinnying green stables onto the fields of praise. And honored among foxes and pheasants by the gay house under the new-made clouds, and happy as the heart was long in the sun born over and over, I ran my heedless ways. My wishes raced through the house-high hay, and nothing I cared at my sky blue trades, that time in all his tuneful turning allows so few and such morning songs before the children, green and golden, follow him out of grace. Nothing I cared in the lamb-white days, that time would take me to the swallow-thronged loft by the shadow of my hand, and that riding to sleep I should hear him fly with the high fields and wake to the farm forever fled to the childless lands. Oh, as I was young and easy in the mercy of his means, time held me green and dying, though I sang in my chains like the sea. Fern Hill by Dylan Thomas. Thank you. They don't write them like that anymore, huh? You're probably thinking, good thing those centennials don't come up all the time. Well, for those of you new to the Arts Café, our mission is to present the nation's most celebrated poets and writers, along with New England's finest musicians, in programs that lift your spirits as they deepen your minds. And if we have a little fun along the way, so much the better. Thank you for the reminder. Won't you please take out your cell phone and place it carefully on the floor beside your chair, and place your heel on it and grind steadily until it is thoroughly subdued. Or at least put it away for the balance of the show. So, on with our show. You know, in some respects, finding star poets to headline our shows is easy. They're stars, after all. Lofty and distant, maybe, but they shine within reach, waiting for us to pay their celestial fees. I like that. Celestial fees. You're paying attention, thank you. But discovering unknown poets to open our shows, now this is hard work. This work entails the reading of many, many, many forgettable poems. From poets clamoring for the opportunity to read on the same bill with our stars. Then there is Danny Dover, tonight's opening voice, whom we found with no clamoring on his part. Mr. Dover brings to us, all the way from Bethel, Vermont, a wonderful debut book of poems called Tasting Precious Metal. Here, as you'll hear, is a gladdening poet whose verbal wit and intelligence put in the service of the kind of wisdom that is born of a life thoughtfully lived. Mr. Dover's poems have been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and have been published in several poetry journals and zines. You'll need to know that Mr. Dover has had a poetically multifarious career. You can see how that's not so easy to get out. As a sometimes folk singer, foundry pattern maker, surveyor, dulcimer maker, rebuilder of Steinway pianos, and photographer. And for 17 years, he was the piano technician at Dartmouth. He lives in a converted schoolhouse with his wife, Mary, a situation that seems conducive to poetry. But we invite you to see for yourself. So won't you please join us in welcoming Danny Dover.
Thank you, Christie. I'm trying to figure out if I know anybody like that, but I'll keep looking. It's wonderful to be here. It's nice to see some color. Where we're in Vermont, where we are, color, foliage is a distant memory, I'm afraid, these days. Well, I realized I had one poem that actually mentions Connecticut. So I thought I'd start with that, although it happened a long time ago. It's called Color Wars. I am a veteran of the Color Wars of Lakeville, Connecticut YMCA camp in the year mile-high bombs bloom in Nevada deserts and we practice diving under school desks when sirens wail way before Nam. The blues against the golds, fighting for points in foot races and rope pulls, penalties for foul language and sloppy beds, bunkmate against bunkmate. I'm hiding behind enemy lines, the only Jew of 300 boys, feeling neither golden nor blue, but maybe white, eager to surrender, more taken with lanyards and toy boats of pine scraps and pipe cleaners than waging war, a time of life when the greatest ambition is blending in, to be just average and not draw attention, not like my perfect 2-point layup once in gym class for the wrong team. So we'll leave Connecticut behind. That's about all I have. And on a completely different note, here's a poem that pays homage to my roots. It's called My People. My New York clan were short, solid stock, cut close to the ground by the wars of Europe. Their bubbly voices fizzing like seltzer in overheated apartments. Ambitions stored away with musty dress suits. Uncle Phil strumming in a mandolin orchestra. Uncle Meyer's meager grocery and Yiddish poems. Tiny chain-smoking Aunt Fika primping wavy salt and pepper hair. And Uncle Sal. Uncle Sal, who fled Germany before the war. These were my people, my ports of call, riding the wild seas of the 60s, who taught of times you must make yourself invisible to survive. Uncle Sal, through misty spectacles, staring past my chin into the face of 1937 Berlin, the Nazis are coming. You'll see, Sal chanted. You'll see. You'll see. And changing gears again, this poem is based on an incident that happened in our house a few years ago. The poem is called Jesus of Comcast. When our phone first went dead, in desperation, I turned to customer service on live chat. Hello, came the instant message. This is Jesus. How can I help you? Now, I know what you're thinking, but please don't go there. Although it crossed my mind too, the shortest straw of a doubt that indeed I might have once been blind, but now could see gentle hands hovering over our 100-year-old house and its slender thread to the World Wide Web. And yet, whether from Oaxaca or Nazareth, a miracle truly did settle upon us that evening in a subtle shift of electrons. The phone resurrected, our sins relieved, and stepping outside in the cold, crisp fall night, bushels of bright stars hung like ripe harvest fruit, while back inside, faith restored, you and a vintage red wine stood beckoning again, full-bodied and brilliant. A lot of good my list is doing. You wouldn't know this, but I'm looking at a list that's in all the wrong order, which is great. It's fine. It keeps me on my toes. So a friend of mine started a second family when he was near 60 years old, and pretty soon he had twins. And I saw him one day, a couple years, 3 years later, and he looked kind of tired, and I asked, "How's it going?" And he said, "They bounce. From the moment they get up to the moment they go to bed, they're just bouncing." And so I thought of that energy, and this poem emerged. I call it Playground. Consider the child who awakens happy, primed and charged to seize the gifts of each new day. Watch how the sun excites her and her friends, bouncing, bruised and battered, like free electrons, undeterred by solid objects. Imagine the origin of our universe, the cosmic burst of nascent energy expanding out past countless galaxies to these pink-faced, laughing, pigtailed, scattered specks of stardust, swirling in the maple-slanted morning light. I've thought a lot about journeys and how we never really know the purpose. Quite often we don't know the purpose of a journey, whether it's physical, spiritual, emotional, until, of course, we can look back and see, connect the dots. And it took me, I figure, 40 years to write this poem about a particular journey I took. The poem is called Yukon Territory. A destination first takes shape in the mouth. Syllables rolled together like gold nuggets in a sluice box and gathered into a feast of dust-choked highway until one evening you're standing alone outside a mine shaft on night shift. Your hard hat beam no match for a burst of northern lights and wolf howls. You are in the spring of your life. Your name, still a destination for others yet to be born, with only a lunchbox at midnight to tide you over to another Arctic dawn. How is it that 2 feet can track through 1 billion stars so the eyes may follow later? Look now, where you've been, where you once thrashed through thick brush like a grazing animal. It's all that remains. This trampled grass, a taste of precious metal. I wrote this poem for my wife. The poem is called Virgin Mary, and her name just happens to be Mary. Her favorite figurine, now a sad pile of broken blue and white porcelain heaped on the counter, and my wife implores a resurrection be performed by me, a simple Jew armed only with superglue and trepidation. But setting mind and jaw squarely to the task of all mankind, I do manage to restore her slightly cracked, sly smile to its proper place. The same smile that smashed me open over 30 years ago, still thrilling in random glances over a sandwich or pillow. And though we've been broken a few times, as may happen to most things brittle when hit by something hard, the scattered china always beckons us to the bare floor on bent knees, searching eye to eye under chair and table for the missing piece, with jagged hands sparkling blue and white and soft in prayer. I have two more poems. The last one's very short. I grew up with a dentist father, and one of the things about, and of course the office back in the 50s was in the house. So I had a dental office in the house, and of course being a poet, you realize it's usually the things that you overlook that are going to be the source of the best poetry. And so I started thinking about that experience and wrote above the dental office. From school each day, I'd return to a room above the office of my dentist father, above the piercing whine of molars filled and whimpering pleas of children trapped like cornered animals, and my father's voice so caring and calm and soothing as mint, all drifting up through ceiling cracks with strains of muzak, in a muted soundtrack for coming of age on warm afternoons of salacious groping with a chain-smoking girlfriend who soon would leave me alone in despair, scorned for spitting each time I French kissed her full, luscious mouth. Disgust and desire and the shriek of the drill all throbbing together in the air of a room where I first learned it's possible to live with pain, or at least lie down a few feet above it. So I'll leave you with this short poem from last winter. I don't know what it was like here, but just about everybody in Vermont agreed that it was especially brutal. And to say that when you're from Vermont is really saying a lot. So, we enjoyed staring out our window at the bird feeder throughout the winter, and so this poem came up, Chickadees. In this deep, cold cave of January, the house beams settle with a cracking thud like an empty pint slammed down on a pub counter. I could use a refill about now. Daylight's running low, and the snow tires have a better grip on things than my slipping sanity. Thank God for the chickadees. Those little truck stop waitresses shrugging off winter's dismal tips, going about their business with eternal cheerfulness. A little more coffee or tea? Thank you very much.
Danny Dover, ladies and gentlemen. All the way from Bethel, Vermont. Don't we all have an Aunt Fika? And don't you love the idea of likening your love to a glass of full-bodied red wine? I'm pleased to announce that we have Danny's splendid debut volume, Tasting Precious Metal, on sale tonight. As always, all proceeds go to the author. This gives me a chance to thank our friends from Banquet Square Books for their support. Mystic is lucky, don't you think, to have so hip and friendly an independent bookstore. I also want to thank the Mystic Arts Center for welcoming the Arts Café again. Our community is fortunate to have such a resource, and we are grateful to feel at home here. So, on with the show. The Arts Café is as proud of the music we present as we are of the poetry. On this very stage, if you will call it a stage, we have featured many flavors of folk, pop, and rock, a metric ton of jazz and standards, some classical music, even opera. And to your everlasting, open-minded credit, you have enjoyed it, or at least tolerated it. But tonight, as your reward, we have a pure treat for you in the collective voices of Connecticut College's only all-male a cappella group, the award-winning Beaux. Cool name, isn't it? The young men of Beaux The young men of Beaux are impatient to be on stage before you. For this all too brief collegiate episode of their lives, they are making music together in New London, of all places, and what music. They arrived tonight with their 8th studio album, a vocal bonbon called Key Change. But the real treat is in catching these guys live and in person, in all their masculine pulchritude, finger-popping charm, and harmonic glory. So hold on to your hats, my friends. Here they are, Beaux.
Shoo-be-doo-wop, 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 hey, hey! Shoo-be-doo-wop, 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 oh, yeah! Sing it right now, oh, yeah!
Well, there's light coming from my window and it shines down on the street. There's some guys standing on the corner singing that good old harmony. And as I rise up from the shadows and my voice carries down the street, I'm alive and I'm proud to be just singing that good old harmony. I'm singing that soul to soul, soul to soul, and brother to brother, brother to brother, a cappella, it sounds good to me. I'm singing that soul to soul, soul to soul, and brother to brother, brother to brother, a cappella, it sounds good to me.
Oh, I just want it understood. Us boys rock boogie to your neighborhood, and I'm standing under the light. All right, singing, yeah, 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 just singing that good old acapella, and it sounds so sweet. I'm alive and I'm proud to be just singing that good old harmony. Just give me that soul to soul, soul to soul, brother to brother, brother to brother, acapella, acapella sounds good to me. Just give me that soul to soul, soul to soul, brother to brother, brother to brother, acapella, acapella sounds good to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are the Beaux from Connecticut College, just down the road. We want to thank you so much for having us here tonight. This is a beautiful gallery, and Mystic is beautiful, and it's great to be here with you all. A special thanks to Christie for inviting us out. This is such a great opportunity, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.
Now when I turn out the light, I say goodbye to another night. I'm gonna rest my weary head, be putting my bones away to bed. Oh, I'm gonna get on my knees and pray to the Lord to give me just one more day. Oh, Lord, hear my plea, 'cause this music means so much to me. Just give me that soul to soul, soul to soul, and brother to brother, brother to brother, acapella, acapella, and it sounds good to me. Just give me that soul, and brother to brother, acapella, you know it sounds good to me. Now that our intro song is done, it's time for us to have some fun. Raise your voice, make some noise. We are the Cocoa Boys. Woo! Standing cold and scared on top of Blue Hill, there came a moment when I lost my will, and I begged for mercy, please, Lord, take me away. Give me a blue sky when I only see gray. Past got a hold on me that can't be denied, but the changes, they don't come easily. I've been lonely, I've been cheated, I've been misunderstood. I've been washed up, I've been put down and told I'm no good. But with you I belong, 'cause you help me feel strong. Well, there's a change in my life since you came along. Sing it, whoa, 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 yeah. Now I don't mind working so hard every day. No, I don't pay no mind to what people say. 'Cause after all the pain that I've been through, Lord knows I give up everything, just love only you. 'Cause all my life I've held my head down in shame, but now that I found you, with you I remain. Don't you know I've been lonely, I've been cheated, I've been misunderstood. I've been washed up, I've been put down and told I'm no good. But with you I belong, 'cause you help me feel strong. There's a change in my life since you came along. Whoa, 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 yeah. Now a man gets crazy when his life is all wrong. And the heart gets weary when it doesn't belong. And the road gets rocky, Lord, you've got to keep on. Let the good light shine down on me. Whoa, whoa. I've been lonely, I've been cheated, I've been misunderstood. I've been washed up, I've been put down and told I'm no good. But with you I belong, 'cause you help me feel strong. And there's a change in my life since you came along. Well, I can see this light forever. Can you hear it? And I can hear it in my soul. But can you feel it? And I've been feeling it for so long. There's a change in my life since you came along. I've been lonely, I've been cheated, I've been misunderstood. I've been washed up, I've been put down and told I'm no good. But with you I belong, 'cause you help me feel strong. Well, there's a change in my life since you came along. Sing it, whoa, whoa, yeah. Whoa, yeah. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
So that right there was A Change in My Life, which has been in the group for a really long time. Next we have Pompeii. This song actually is the first song of our CD that we just released this spring called Key Change. Unfortunately, we don't have any hard copies for you tonight, but you can find it on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, RDO, YouTube if you just want to see the videos, but it's everywhere, so go ahead and give it a look and a listen. That's Kokobeau, C-O-C-O-B-A-U, and the album again is Key Change. And this is Pompeii, soloed by Ben Ballard.
I was left to my own devices. Many days fell away with nothing to show, but the walls kept tumbling down. The city that we love. Gray clouds rolled over the hills, bring darkness from above. But if you close your eyes, it's almost feeling like nothing's changed at all. And if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like you've been here before? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? We were caught up and lost in all of our vices, in our bows as the dust settles around us, and the walls kept tumbling down. The city that we love. Gray clouds rolled over the hills, bring darkness from above. But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing's changed at all? And if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like you've been here before? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? Oh, where do we begin? The Bible or our sins? Oh, where do we begin? The rubble or our sins? And the walls kept tumbling down in cities that we love. Gray clouds rolled over the hills, bringing darkness from above. But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing's changed at all? And if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like you've been here before? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? If you close your eyes, does it almost feel like you've been here before?
Thank you all again very much. It's awesome to see a packed house, and this is our first time here at the Arts Café, so it's a real pleasure. So thank you again very much for coming out to support us. So that was Pompeii, originally by a band named Bastille, soloed by my friend Ben. We're going to keep it a little more contemporary with this next one. This is called All Right. It's by a gentleman by the name of John Legend, and my friend Kadeem does it much better than he does. Hope you enjoy it. It's true. I think I'm biased.
I see you checking me out. I think I know what you're winking about. You're with your man, you don't want him to see. It's alright with me. I know I drink a little bit much. You think I'm talking crazy and such. I can't walk straight, but girl, I can see. You're alright with me. Alright, I see a little something that I like. You're looking mighty fine in them skin tights, you know what I mean? It's alright with me. Hold up, I know you got a man, but I'm toe up. And I don't even care if he roll up with something to say. You better tell him you don't want it with me. It's alright.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Good Lord, you got body for days. I think the way that you shake it's amazing. I got my keys if you're ready to leave. It's alright with me. Come check your man, cause he's going insane. You wanna know what the hell's my name? If he's crazy enough to get in my face, it's alright with me. Alright, I see a little something that I like. You're looking mighty fine in them tights, you know what I mean? It's alright with me. Hold up, I know you got a man, but I'm up. And I don't even care if he roll up with something to say. You better tell him you don't want it with me. Come on, why don't you test me? If you want me, come and get me. I'll show you who the best be. It's alright with me. I'll watch you for a long time. I swear you're looking alright. Come closer if you like what you see. It's alright with me. Alright. I see a little something that I like. You're looking mighty fine in them skin tights. You know what I mean? It's alright with me. Hold up. I know you got a man, but I'm. And I don't even care if he roll up with something to say. You better tell him he don't want it with me. It's alright.
Thanks. I'm going to let him take a break. So this next one is a very different vibe. This song was originally done by Sting. It's called Why Should I Cry For You, and we've revamped it so it's got much more a choral feel, and we hope you enjoy.
Under the dark star sail, over the reefs of moonshine, under the skies of fall, northwest the stones of Pharaoh, under the Arctic fire, over the seas of silence, hauling on frozen ropes for all my days remaining. But would north be true? All colors bleed to red, asleep on the ocean's bed, drifting in empty seas for all my days remaining. But would Why should I cry for you? Dark angels follow me over a godless sea. Mountains of endless falling for all my days remaining. What would be true? Sometimes I see your face. The stars seem to lose their place. Why must I think of you? Why must I, why should I, why should I cry for you? Why would you want me to? And what would it mean to say that I loved you in my fashion? What would be true? Why should I cry for you?
Thank you again for having us tonight. This was fantastic. This was a pleasure for us, and we hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Hopefully we can come back sometimes. We are the Kokomo from Connecticut College. Check us out on everywhere.
Kokomo, ladies and gentlemen. I admit that I've eagerly looked forward to this moment. It's always a pleasure to share a friend with you. It's worth noting that there are some poets who publish everything that squirts from their pens, and they gain reputations as prolific. Another kind of poet composes each poem as though his or her life depended on it. These poets publish more rarely, but every poem is an important moment in the life of the reader. Ellen Thompson is one such poet. Ms. Thompson's previous collections of poems, or previous collection of poems, The Golden Hour, was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, as was her third volume, The Leaving. Her first book, This Body of Silk, won the Samuel French Morse Poetry Prize, and she has also won the Pablo Neruda Prize and the Maryland Author Award. Among other honors, she has been a Robert Frost Fellow at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference and a resident poet at Frost Place in Franconia. She also served as the editor of the Autumn House Anthology of Contemporary Poetry, which is taught in classrooms across the nation. And several of her poems have been read memorably, I might add, by Garrison Keillor on NPR's Writer's Almanac. Ms. Thompson's poems have notably examined and celebrated family life in small-town New England, documenting the everyday experience of marriage, birth, parenting, aging, and death. She has created a body of work that captures the texture and complexity of ordinary life, while illuminating, magnifying, and affirming our familiar quotidian. Though many of her poems are deeply personal and emotionally intense, her supple craft and unsentimental intelligence render them readily accessible. She also seasons her work, as you'll hear, with a useful, kindly sense of humor. These are just some of the reasons why this poet has won a large and adoring audience. Ms. Thompson has just published an extraordinary new book of poems called They. They lays stake to original new ground in its thematic concerns while building on her well-established foundations of brilliant craft. The poems in They tell the story of a mother, her aging father, and her transgender child in exploring the challenges that gender identity poses to 3 different generations. The beautifully made poems of They get at the majesty and mystery of family bonds and find grace there. But the poems say it all, my friends. So it is with pride that I ask you to join me in welcoming Ellen Thompson.
Thank you. It was 8 years ago, almost to the day, I believe, when I last stood up here and gave what I thought was my farewell reading. In fact, I think it was the female a cappella group from Conn College that was the music message there. I assumed I was about to move to the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and I assumed we'd sell our house in a month or so and be starting an exciting new chapter. Well, here we are 8 years later, and all I can say for those of you who are thinking that you might want to leave Mystic someday is start when you're young, because it might take a while. Those of you who know what's been going on, we were down there for 4 years. I have been there for 8 years. My husband came back 4 years ago, moved into our still unsold house, and ran the Connecticut Humanities Council for the last 4 years. And now he is retired and living back in Maryland with me. I always describe my town of Oxford, Maryland, as being very much like Noank if you ran a steam iron over it. There's no kind of busy downtown the way there is in Mystic. It's actually sort of a cross between Noank and Stonington. So with that as background, I will begin with some poems about moving. Home. The place your parents brought you straight from the hospital, where you spent those endless years of grade school. Or maybe it's the place where you raised your own children, where you were never alone. The place you retreat to after the divorce, or when circumstances force you to go there. According to Frost, they have to, but you know the rest. Who can say for how many weeks after moving you will lie awake staring at the clock radio before you stop listening for the pre-dawn roar of traffic down your former street, before the word begins to rise from deep inside somewhere as you approach the yellow blinker at Main and Oak, which, like the porch light your mother flicked off and on when you and your first lover were parked at the darkest edge of the lawn, reminds you where you belong. I originally thought that the title of this book would be The Empty House. I mean, I've had one for 8 years, and it became a sort of metaphor for a lot of the things that were going on in my life at the time. And then other things took over. But I will read what was going to be the title poem of that book that never quite came together, The Empty House. House that we bought just a month before we were married. After the wedding, the rooms unfolded anew. House where I brought the baby straight from the hospital, sat at the dining room table, unbuttoned my blouse. House of the Christmas Eve dinners, my niece and her boyfriend together on the piano bench, which to this day bears a mark from the heat of their thighs. House of the homework assignments, the three of us up half the night making 2-inch tall teepees of bark from the birch tree and little plaid bedrolls cut from an old flannel shirt. House so toxic with anger, a teenager's venomous mouth, that for 3 years we dared not have anyone over for dinner. Then, when she left us for college, a silence so vast we inflicted our surplus endearments on a long-suffering 12-year-old cat. House of near-human sounds, bone creaks and moaning, sighing and wailing in storms. House of our long years of marriage, your limbs entwined around mine like ivy around the round stones of the stone walls surrounding the yard. House of the woodpile, the woodshed, the canvas wood carrier carried 6 times a day from the shed to the wood stove, the smell of felled maple and oak. House I came home to after my mother died, put down my suitcase and lay on the bed with my coat still on, hands folded over the knot of my sorrow as sleep closed its massive green door. Is Ann Burgess here tonight? My real estate agent. Just checking. Okay. No, I was going to dedicate a poem to her. Well, I could dedicate it to Melinda Carlisle, too. She put her time in. This is sort of, I guess you'd call it a modified sonnet. For sale. Few buyers came to look, and when they did, what could they see? Not the twin bed where my daughter begged for my embrace each night as darkness dropped between us, or the lantern wavering in the dogwood tree over our quiet picnic dinners after she'd gone off to college. Not the sun-racked sofa where every afternoon I napped in the lush company of my own desires, or the desk to which I brought an acolyte's gratitude each morning for the God who'd let me in without a proper job. The realtor flung and flapped her arms, hurling her superlatives around the room. For who could sell except the rhapsodist, the empty frame for so much happiness? Okay, time to move on. The book that I thought would be about place turned out to be, just like all my other books, about family. In this case, my only child, now in her early 30s, and my father, who died a little over 2 years ago at the age of 91. They had a remarkably close relationship, which is unusual when you consider that he was a World War II veteran and about, as conservative as they come. And she was about as alternative, I guess is the word, as the grandchild could be. So I'll read a few poems about her. A photograph of my daughter at 9. She's sitting in a dining room chair. Light through the blinds has tightened its straps across her narrow body, and a blow dryer has transformed her wispy hair into a child-sized helmet. Her legs are crossed and shackled to each other at the ankle, and she grips the chair arms with the wild-eyed stare of one who is about to undertake a journey full of risk and turbulence instead of a simple meal. Well, 35 years ago, I couldn't wait to have a baby so I could shop at the Blue Horse. I always wished that I had a reason to go in that store. Is it still here? Yeah. It's still there, great. Well, that first visit didn't go down quite the way I anticipated. A birthday gift. There was a children's clothing store in town, and when I took her there to buy an outfit for her second birthday, she walked right past the dresses I pulled off the rack, their small yokes choked with smocking, and with the single-minded grace of the athlete she'd become, went straight to a pair of gray wool knickers. Charmed by this display of independence at such an age, I picked out a navy hair ribbon, which my daughter promptly wore around her pale neck, knotted like a tie. So, my daughter was always a tomboy, which I thought was great. I mean, I loved not having a girly girl. But I noticed as she got older, particularly during her years at Pine Point, that she wasn't changing. You know, she wasn't outgrowing it. This poem is called A Comfort. When she turned 6 and wouldn't wear a dress to her own party, the other mothers smiled knowingly and said, "She'll come around." When she was 10 and threw away the valentine a boy had sent, my mother said, "She's only 10, she'll come around." At 12, she wore her father's flannel shirts to school. "They call it grunge," her teacher said. She'll come around when she's a little older." In high school, there were other girls who spiked their hair and dyed it dark magenta, but only mine wore underwear designed for men beneath her low-slung cargo pants. Waiting outside the school one day, I heard another mother say, "I know my daughter won't look like this forever. When she goes to college, she'll come around." Then she added, with some embarrassment, "So will yours." I shook my head. My daughter had worn camouflage to nursery school. She came home from college with piercings in her cartilage. "Stop worrying," my husband said. "She'll come around when she has to get a job." I knew that would make no difference. She found a place that hired her just as she was. "She'll meet a guy, and that will be the end of it." More than a few friends told me this. "You don't know my daughter," I said. But cradling myself in bed, I thought, she'll come around. Well, when she was a senior at NFA, she was elected class artist, and she had to go to the Christmas dance to receive her award. And this, she made her own dress. This was sort of like the trip to the Blue Horse. It wasn't really what I had in mind. The paper dress. She never went to high school proms and showed no interest in boys. But the night of the Christmas dance, she came downstairs wearing a paper lawn and leaf bag on which she'd painted the curvaceous body of the woman she had no intention of becoming, wearing a snug white dress with bra straps showing and an inch-wide zipper running from her cross-hatched cleavage to her fishnet knees. The teacher who was chaperoning wouldn't let her in, although her friends were wearing strapless, backless, asymmetric hems that clung discreetly to one ankle before soaring up the opposite thigh. My daughter bit down hard on her own anger, looked the teacher in the eye, and slowly, stiffly started walking backwards to the door, her middle finger raised behind the paper dress's hourglass waist. Well, right after we moved to Maryland, that very week, in fact, where I had no friends. I really hadn't even met anyone yet. Certainly didn't have anyone in whom I could confide. Our daughter wrote us a letter explaining that she was transgender, which is a very broad term that covers anyone whose birth gender doesn't match, to one degree or another, their gender identity. It has nothing to do with sexual orientation. And I think this is what threw me, because I had been waiting patiently for years for her to come to me and tell me she was gay. And this was the one thing that never crossed my mind. This poem is written in 2 sections separated by 27 years. anniversary. November 15th, 1979. That morning, to ease my nerves before the town hall ceremony, I went for a run in the park. From the top of the hill near the Greenwich Observatory, I could see Tower Bridge rising from the sludge-colored pavement of the Thames. The concrete sky behind it and the path on which I ran sent the truth reverberating up the stanchion of my spine. I had an envelope in my pocket with a check for the doctor whose hand had pressed down hard on my belly, my life about to change. November 15th, 2006. I meet my husband at a restaurant to celebrate. Instead, he hands me a letter in which our now-grown daughter lays it all out, 4 pages, single-spaced, of things we've managed not to talk about. Each year in mid-November, I think of that restaurant, of the meal that was not eaten, the glasses that were not raised, of that letter whose secrets would require that we begin from birth again to know our only child. My mother died in 2002, right after my daughter graduated from RISD. And after that, she took it upon herself. She'd been very close to my mother, but she took it upon herself to remain equally close to my father. So all throughout her late 20s and early 30s, she would write him postcards, usually one a month, sometimes more than that, in which she would talk about, her life, what she was doing, what was happening at work, her travels, that kind of thing. And he would save them for me and either read them over the phone or he'd leave them on the night table in the room where I stayed when I visited. Postcards. Postmarked Ann Arbor, Fort Wayne, Memphis, and a dozen other places I never knew she'd visited. My daughter's postcards to her widowed grandfather were the only way I had of finding out what she was up to during those years when her phone calls thinned to almost nothing. He would leave them on the nightstand in the bedroom where I slept when I was visiting, and I would read them, row after row of minuscule block letters, pausing patiently before the fenced-off plot she'd set aside for sheltering his name and address just before I went to sleep. She often signed them, "Thinking of you, Pop," and I did not for 1 minute doubt which shelf he occupied in the library of her affections. And how did that make you, her mother, feel? A shrink would no doubt ask. And I would have to answer that it made me happy. Happier, I think, than if those cards had been addressed to me. Here was a man who'd waited 19 years for a grandson, who had kept his wishes silent as 6 granddaughters were born. Here was a man who liked to spend a summer day fishing lazily along the Merrimack, winter weekends stacking cordwood, and here was a child who wanted to be at his side doing what he did. They seemed to have an understanding. She would give him all the love that she could spare for generations preceding her own, and in return, he'd never say a word about her tattoos or her piercings or her boyish haircut, or ask her why she hid her breasts and let her mustache show. He would simply think of her as the grandson he'd been waiting for, and she would always think of him as the man she wanted to be like when she was old and had no grandson of her own. Well, I'll read you one of the poems that I wrote based on these postcards, and it is 97% her language. Some of them I shortened, occasionally I changed the rhythm a little, but I didn't have to do too much to them. And I got another 25 right before my father died, the week before. He motioned to his dresser drawer, and there were another 25 in there. So I had many to work from. And I decided to include them in the book because without them, you would only be hearing my voice, and you would only be seeing her through my eyes, which didn't really seem fair. Postcard, Lakota Wolf Preserve, Columbia, New Jersey. Hey, Pop, I went on a 24-hour getaway with some friends to the Delaware Water Gap, 2 hours north of Philly. We floated down the river in tubes all afternoon, camped for the night, then got up early for the Wolf Watch at a place nearby where 25 timber, tundra, and Arctic wolves now live. There were bobcats who'd been someone's pets, and 2 red foxes. All were either born in captivity or rescued from roadside attractions, so they weren't afraid of humans. I was thinking about that cougar you once spotted in New Hampshire. Next time you see him, tell him there's a home for him here in New Jersey. Isn't that where you spent your wild youth? I miss our early morning walks. Love, Thomason. Like a lot of people, when they get older, my father started losing his inhibitions. And he started, among other things, using language that I had never heard him use and could not imagine him using. Because I grew up in a house where shut up was considered a swear word. And you'd get your mouth washed out with a soapy washcloth if you said shut up. I should also mention that my dad was a bomber pilot in the war and a POW. At 89, my father takes up swearing. The Army must have taught him how, and then he spent those 2.5 years in a German POW camp with all the other starving men who used such words to salt the watery gruel of their existence. But when he came back to my mother, she would not permit a damn or hell or any of those in vain names to cross her well-scrubbed door sill. He never slipped in the more than 50 years I listened. But now that she's beneath the lawn of the cemetery on the other side of town, he cannot find his cane. The one that is no good for anything because the rubber tip keeps falling off. Jesus, what a pain to bend and search for it beneath his bed, especially when he hits his head on the open drawer of that bedside table. He lies there on the threadbare rug and tries to remember what the hell it was he lost. My mother, were she still alive, would flush in anger and cut him off. But who am I, who have not leapt from a burning plane or slept in a barracks whose floorboards must be taken up one at a time for burning when the coal runs out, to tell my father what to say? Where the f*** is his cane? Man, I have no idea. That's my father. He never really asked too many questions about my daughter. And he thought she was probably gay, and we left it at that. Because I thought at 91, the whole transgender concept would be just too difficult for him to get his head around. So we just sort of left it at that. They had such a wonderful relationship. There didn't seem to be any point in bringing it up. At the kitchen window. Ignoring the tattoos, the piercings, the triangle of hair shaved off geometrically above each ear, the elastic waistband of men's underwear visible above her belt, which cut across her rear the way my mother's tape measure did when I was her age and took my measurements. My father always welcomed visits from my daughter, which were more frequent than her visits home. She'd sit with him on the porch in the evenings, praising his tomatoes, asking questions about what it was like to be a pilot or a prisoner of war. He never said anything to anyone indicating he was bothered by the way she looked, except that morning when he stood at the kitchen window, watching as she took aim, pitching windfall apples into the woods that fringed his vast, well-cared-for yard, and said, "If I didn't know differently, I'd think she was a boy." I poured some coffee I didn't want or need into a mug as slowly as I could, and then some milk, and stirred. I waited for that thought and the mood it cast over me to settle without a word. I'll read another postcard poem. My daughter has been vegan for many years. I honestly can't remember when she started that. It was a long time ago. And a lot of her postcards end with a little tidbit, a little piece of health advice for her grandfather, who, survived to be 91 and a half, and for the last 10 years, he only ate fried eggs, sausages, and Manhattans. Homemade postcard. Hey, Popper, it's been snowy and cold this week in Philly, but I've been enjoying the flickering flames of my new plug-in wood stove. It brings a little New Hampshire charm to my big city life. I just come home and flick it on for instant coziness and ambiance. Speaking of comforts, I read an article in the New York Times about some bees in Brooklyn whose honey stomachs turned bright red and who produced red honey. It seems that they've been gathering their nectar at a nearby maraschino cherry factory. That made me think of you and your Manhattans. You always say the cherry at the bottom is your favorite part. Be careful. I don't want your insides turning red. Remember what the doctor said. Drink more water. Love, Thomason. Well, while we're on the subject of drinking more water, which is something we never got my father to do. He just would not drink water. We bought him every container, with the kind with the permanent straw fixed, and put them on every table, and they would all be full at the end of the day. He said he got plenty of water from melting ice cubes. Maybe if we'd mixed in a little whiskey and vermouth, he would have had it. My father's third Manhattan. And he gets sentimental and wants to talk about the old days when we were still in grade school. Coming home from work at night, he'd park the Pontiac in the garage and enter through the basement, past the science project on the workbench, past the ping pong table covered with a sheet tied back at one end to reveal our sleeping bags and pillows. 2, and he remembers coming up the stairs and reaching for the door, on the other side of which I waited for him, ear tuned to his every homecoming noise. Just as his hand closed on the doorknob, I would yank it open. The only one of my 5 kids, he says, eyes filling as he stirs his third, who was always there to greet me. Although more than 50 years have passed, soon he will be calling me a little tiker, eyes fixed on the cherry at the bottom of his glass. Why is this what he remembers of my childhood? Why is this the story he repeats? Why have I never told him I was only trying to scare him, not to make him weep? I will read the title poem of the book, which deals with one of the biggest problems I faced when putting this manuscript together. Any of you who have read much about transgenderism know how important pronouns are to the transgender community. And, I'm an English major, and this posed quite a problem for me. They. Reading about the artist at my daughter's first solo exhibit, I notice that she refers to herself as queer, a once derogatory word that is now back in vogue. Unversed in the linguistic proprieties, I read on, hoping to unearth some clue as to the exact nature of her gender identity view of herself, and this is what I see. Their work is characterized by the play of the familiar and the unfamiliar, made from objects they have found within a 5-block radius of their apartment. Who is they? Does she have a partner I've not met, a co-creator I know nothing about? Because my experience with coming out is limited to a gay friend from college, she sets me straight. Since neither he nor she is accurate, I should refer to her as they. Whether or not I'm okay with this is irrelevant. If I want to see her more than once a year, I may as well begin by unlearning the rule of noun-pronoun agreement. In this school, I am the student, she the teacher, they. Well, the photograph on the cover of this book is of the little playhouse, the little hut that my father built his grandchildren on his property in New Hampshire. And I'm sorry to say that when my husband and I were up there a few weeks ago to get some of my parents' furniture out of the house, I went out to take, one last photograph of the hut, and it had been vandalized. It had been knocked off its footings and the door was yanked off. Very sad. Echo Rock. When my daughter was young, my father built a hut for her on Echo Rock, the granite mound for which the farm was named and from which, if she faced the house, she could pitch her name and have it flung right back. Made from barnboard scraps, the weathered gray that characterized the foreshortened days of a New Hampshire winter, it had a single window facing north and a door that she could padlock. I hear her still from the clump of underbrush that kept her refuge and its secrets hidden at the end of a day when it appeared that she had played contentedly alone. "Thomason," she called repeatedly, as if there were another of her, and it was time now for them both to hurry home. Another postcard, Vintage Philadelphia. Aptly named Vintage Philadelphia. Dear Pop, I had a great time visiting last week with you and your 2 sisters. Anissa and I spent the whole ride home talking about how much fun it was hanging out with people in their 80s. Aunt Ruthie pinched Anissa's arm and said it felt like it was made of rubber. Guess there aren't too many young people where she lives. And Aunt Connie asked me if I cut my hair this way on purpose. She's hilarious. Anyway, after listening to so many friends' post-holiday complaints about their cold, offensive older relatives, I feel particularly grateful that I have such energetic, charming ones. Stay warm and eat some vegetables. Love, Thomason. My father hated getting, he would hate it if 4 of us called him on one night and then he got no phone calls the next night. And I think this is fairly common among families, so, we would each call him on a separate night. Wednesdays. Along with his 2 surviving sisters, the 5 of us divided up the week so that one of us would call my father every night at dinner time. My night was Wednesday, and after we discussed the weather and he expressed amazement that New Hampshire could have record-breaking rains while Maryland clung stubbornly to drought, he'd ask if I had spoken with my daughter lately. I'd say no, that it had been a month, or that I'd left a message and she hadn't called me back. And he'd say what a shame that was. He didn't understand how silence could descend between a parent and a child. With that, He'd reach across the kitchen table with his knotted fingers for her latest postcard, then for his magnifying glass. I marveled at the torrent of her sentences when her communications with me were so sere and brief. When he was done, I'd say, "I'll talk to you again next week," to which he responded cheerfully, right up until the end, "I hope so." My father believed that women were superior creatures to men, that they were more understanding, more tolerant, better able to withstand pain. And one of his favorite phrases was the title of this poem, "I Love Women." My father said this to the tall, blonde ophthalmologist who greeted him as he was wheeled into the operating room where she would give him back his vision. He said it to the caretaker who tucked him in at night, although he told me privately that she could stand to lose a few. He said it to the stranger in the parking lot at Shaw's, whose head was pulled so far back in her parka hood that she grabbed his arm and pulled him close, thinking he was her husband. He even said it to his grown transgender grandchild, who laughed and took it all in stride. Less than a week before he died, as I leaned across his bed to rearrange the blankets, he hauled his good arm back and swatted me on the ass, a gesture that must have cost what little strength he had. "Pop," I said, in a voice I hoped would combine the amused surprise and muted moral outrage that had characterized my mother's reply each time he grabbed a handful of her not-so-youthful flesh. "What are you doing?" He let his head fall back into the pillow's ample lap as a smile suffused his ancient face. "Sue, you're looking good," he said. "In fact, you're looking great." Well, the older my father got, the more time I spent worrying about him. You know, if I called and he didn't answer the phone, I'd immediately be on the phone with all his neighbors and have them come look in the windows to see if he'd, fallen or whatever. And he was usually in the bathroom or in the garage. I dream about my father at 87. Someone has given me a horse for which I am certain I have not asked. Its steaming muzzle makes me want to hold the long bone of its head in my arms, but the skittishness of its hooves, it seems to be standing on only 3, inspires a mild terror. Clearly it is mine now. It lowers its forelock modestly and picks at some threads in the earth. In the agate of its eye is the curve of my own worried face. I have no halter to lead it home, no pasture in which it can graze. And yet it follows me, shoes ticking across the frozen ground. How will I care for a horse in winter? What if it slips and breaks its leg? What will I do if it dies before spring and I have no hole prepared for its grave? A few more. Another postcard. Postcard, the Wissahickon Valley. Dear Pop, I went on a bird walk here, led by an old man with a hat and jacket that looked as though he grabbed them off the shaker pegs by your back door. He had a photographic memory of every bird he'd seen in 30 years. He knew their names, the color of their feathers, and could even imitate their songs. It reminded me of how you remember every fish you've ever caught, even the ones that got away. Another rainy day in Philadelphia. Sorry you're in so much pain. Know that you are in my thoughts. I miss you and Echo Rock. Love, Thomason. Somebody once told me that the reason the poetry world was so cutthroat and competitive is that the stakes were so low. And I think it's true. You know, I don't have to explain, I'm sure, to anyone here. I will say that we went through a pretty grim period in 2010 in Maryland. My husband had lost his job. We owned 3 houses. It was a tough time. Envy. There was a time when I envied the friend who came from money, married money. Then her husband was taken from her. So I trained my green eye on the friend who divorced and had a string of lovers until her daughters, one by one, married and divorced. For a while, I wanted to be the friend whose child, a son, was very nearly perfect until he hung himself. So I envied the friend who had just been given tenure, not to mention one of poetry's biggest prizes, when she received her diagnosis. I knew then I was better off being who I am, my husband jobless, my daughter a man, writing my poems for nothing. Okay, just 2 more. It wasn't until he was very near the end of his life, my father really started talking about World War II. It seemed to come back in a very vivid way. The last time I saw my father, he couldn't sleep, couldn't get comfortable in the hospital bed we'd brought into his room, would push a button and his feet would rise up to the ceiling. He had no appetite. He was thirsty, but drinking only made him want to pee, and he couldn't do that either. In the middle of the night, I found him sitting with his thin legs dangling off the bed, pajama bottoms halfway to his knees, one hand holding what I didn't want to see, the plastic urinal tipped over on the table, out of reach. With sudden clarity, he looked at me and asked, "Are we drilling today?" I thought he might be dreaming about the VA dental clinic, where he had endured 6 decades of extractions, root canals, and a series of bridges that never seemed to work or fit, the legacy of his stay in a German POW camp. But then I realized that it was 1943, and he was back in Lubbock, Texas, in the Army Air Corps. "No drills today," I told him. And this seemed to comfort him. "Good," he said, and then, "I'm tired," closing his eyes as if he knew that nothing further would be required. This is the last poem. I'll read the last one in the book. Inheritance. After the funeral, I told my daughter she could choose what she wanted from her grandfather's New Hampshire farmhouse. She took the yellowed handkerchiefs with which he'd wiped his brow when mowing the lawn those 30 summers after his retirement, a leather belt, well-worn but stiff from hanging where he'd abandoned it when nothing but suspenders could keep his pants from falling off his ancient hips, and the pajama bottoms he had worn for what turned out to be his last 8 days and nights. As I watched her fold and pack her small inheritance in a grocery bag, I asked, "Isn't there something else?" thinking of a rug or piece of furniture. She went directly to the small spice chest that had hung on the wall for 50 years. Opening each of the miniature drawers and peering inside, she said, "Just this," and pulled out a campaign-style button that said, "I flew a B-24, which she pinned to her stocking cap as she boarded the train for home. Thank you very much.
So Ellen Thompson, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Sue Ellen. Thanks also to Coco Beaux and to Danny Dover. For those of you who would like to take some Sue Ellen Thompson home tonight, we have the brilliant They on sale, which she would be glad to sign for you. For news about our spring season, don't forget to sign up on our mail list. And remember, the Arts Café, my friend, is a tribute to you. This is community, and doesn't it feel good? Thank you and good night.